Hi, I'm Guy Powell, and welcome to the next episode of the Backstory on the Shroud of Turin. If you haven't already done so, please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more of these episodes. I am the author of the upcoming book, The Only Witness, a historical fiction tracing a possible history of the Shroud over the last 2 millennia. Today, we'll be speaking with Joe Marino. He is one of the preeminent researchers on the Shroud of Turin. We'll be talking about some of his recent papers, which can be found on academia.edu. Also, if you'd like, you can sign up for his newsletter at jmarino240@aol.com. jmarino240@aol.com. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Joe. He has a BA of Theological Studies from the University of St. Louis. He is a longtime syndenologist. That means somebody that studies the Shroud of Turin. He has researched, written, and lectured extensively on the Shroud since 1977, and currently works at The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. As early as 1977, he was fascinated through a book he read, and since then he has been hooked on further study of the Shroud. He believes the Shroud can be shown to be the true burial cloth of Jesus, but that would make it only an interesting archaeological object. However, he believes that it's much more important for the spiritual message that it can bring. As a former Benedictine monk and Catholic priest, Joe believes that organized religion has often depicted Jesus as an unreachable deity whose standards we can never reach. With his work, he hopes to show that the Shroud represents a more human Jesus, one who is someone we can not only approach, but as indicated in the Gospel of John, a person we can even surpass in doing great things. It is his hope and desire that his work can get this message across, and it is his belief that this is the destiny to which he has been called, which is why he has been given the passion he possesses for the Shroud. Joe, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. You've written so much on the Shroud and done so much. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the recent activities you've been doing?
Well, one little correction in the bio. I'm actually retired now from Ohio State University. It'll be 4 years actually, coming up in October, and that's why I've been able to actually write so much recently. I have a feeling it could be curtailed a little bit. I got a new dog several months ago, and they're almost like having a kid. You have to keep your eye on them all the time. And yeah, with the first couple months I had it, I had a little mishap with him on a walk. He refused to walk, and I had to carry him, and I hit an uneven part of the sidewalk and took a nasty fall, which I'm just getting over now, about 6 weeks later. And then shortly after that, he had to have 2 surgeries because of bladder stones, but he's recovered from that. So hopefully the rest of our time together will be a little less catastrophic than those 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I think dogs are just like having kids. So yeah, good luck with that. And after you've retired.
Yeah. So, when I did retire, I just decided to start writing shortish, well, some short, some longer articles on what I consider to be the most important aspects of the Shroud. So, Stirp's work and different questions that come up about the radiocarbon dating and just all sorts of topics. I think I've written about 60 articles since I originally retired, and I just wanted to, put the material out there and hope other people see it and incorporate it in their work and flesh out some details that, we're still trying to find out about the Shroud. As I mentioned to you before we actually got started, almost anything, any point you bring up about the Shroud, you've got a critic out there that'll try to contest it. But my hope is to educate people with as much solid data as possible. Some of my articles are just kind of straight bibliographies, and some are, regular articles of the normal kind. And what's nice about the articles is that I have a lot of hot links in all of them that people can expand on it and do their own research on it. I guess one of the things that irritates me most, especially after 45 years of doing this, is that I see a lot of people do videos, critics, do 3 to 5 minute videos and pretend that they've, debunked the shroud or something in 3 to 5 minutes. It's like, no, you haven't quite done that yet. And a lot of, there are some skeptics that do homework, but quite frankly, you could tell just from their videos and from their writings that they haven't done much homework. And the shroud is a very complicated subject, okay? It is literally the most important studied, the most intensely studied artifact, I should say, in human history. And that's not just relics. We're talking artifacts and periods. So there is no other object on the face of the planet that has had as much research put into it as the shroud has. So, to just kind of blithely dismiss it and say, oh, this is a bad fake, or, I read my English language Bible and he was, it says linen strips, so he was buried like a mummy, so the shroud can't be real. And it's like, folks, come on, you have to do a little research. So that's kind of, the idea behind a lot of my articles, is to try to educate people and hope that they do further research, because I've been doing this since the late 70s, and I was a young guy back then, and I'm not so young anymore, and we need to get some younger folks into the picture. And what our science and technology has increased so much since the late 70s, and it's really a shame that the church won't allow any additional testing. And sources have told us that it probably won't happen with Pope Francis. He's got a background in chemistry, so you think he might be open to it. But, I understand he's got other issues to take care of. But, the church did allow the Shroud of Turin Research Project 5 days in 1978. And basically all the research back then pointed toward authenticity. And then, Stirp wanted to do 27 or 26 tests, that is. So they submitted to the authorities a proposal for those tests, which included C14. And the C14 labs that were interested in promoting C14 managed to petition the authorities to only do the C14 and to eliminate Stirp from all their other tests. And that turned out to be a disaster. Stirp should have been allowed to at least participate in the C14 if that's all they did. And they made the big mistake of taking only one sample instead of 3, because you need to have control samples. You've got a 14.5-foot long cloth, and you're taking one little sample and dividing it up into 3 and giving it to the 3 labs. You don't know for sure if that's representative. That's why they had suggested, the authorities or the experts had suggested taking at least 3 samples. And they originally were going to do 7 labs, and they cut that down to 3. And an interesting note about those labs, okay, of the 7, the 4 that were eliminated are now out of business. The 3 that ended up doing the test are going strong and raking in millions. Actually, the C14 industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry right now. So the fact that they were able to get the publicity from dating the shroud really helped those 3 labs. But you know, there were a lot of problems with that test. I documented them in my
Yep, and I've got that book right here. Very interesting. I found it fascinating, and absolutely. So don't let me interrupt you. Keep going.
Yeah, I had 800 pages there, and then I knew I was going to have additional material, so I dedicated a page on my website for overflow, and I have about 80 entries there. And then I thought, just for a little more access, I reproduced that supplement as a separate article on academia. So now I'm basically only updating the academia article. So if my website page is mentioned in the book, as you know, so people can check that, but when they go to my site there, it'll redirect them to the academia article, so they can get the latest information.
Yeah, the thing that, if you don't mind, let me stop you there a second. I really did like that book, and what I think was really good about it was that it showed not only one side, but kind of both sides, and then also a very good commentary on what actually happened in each of these different steps as the lead up took place to that 1988 carbon-14 testing. And one of the things that I really like about your recent articles, and there's been 3 or 4 of them, there's the radiocarbon dating, and then there's the botany of the Turin Shroud, there's a Sedarium of Oviedo, and then some individual medical doctors' viewpoints. And what I liked about them is you have then all of the different papers related to them. And like you said, with the hot links to that. And then so you can get different opinions as to what's going on there. And I think that's really key, especially, you know, to your point early on, which was that there are, you know, the anti-Shroudists and then the pro-Shroudists. And I think you're right. The anti-Shroudists, you know, they put out 3 or 4 sentences and they think they're done. And yet, like you said, the Shroud is 2,000 years of science that needs to be studied and understood. And I think there's probably, you know, still a wealth of knowledge that hasn't even been found yet that is going to come out. So a lot going on there.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that as much new material still comes out, considering, you know, Stirp hasn't tested it since the 70s, and they restored it in 2002. I mean, you don't normally restore relics, but that's I guess a whole nother question.
Yep.
And the 88 test is in question. They only did the C14, you know, and people, there's this misconception around C14 that it's practically infallible and foolproof. And that is really, nothing could be further than the truth, because it can be very accurate, but people should remember that most objects that are radiocarbon dated have been buried in the ground or whatever for hundreds or thousands of years. The Shroud, as we know, has been, you know, exposed and since at least the 1350s. So it's not your typical object for carbon dating. And there were a lot of warnings about, well, I mean, even if the image was caused by the resurrection and there was radiation involved, people were worried that that could change the carbon content. And of course, there are a lot of current theories going around about the image formation that do deal with radiation. I personally don't get too worked up about any of the theories, because I think you really can't reproduce resurrection in a laboratory. So there's a lot of speculation involved. Although I must say, I did find the experiment that Paolo Di Lazzaro and his group did in about 2010 over in Italy, where they zapped a control piece of linen with a ultraviolet Eczema laser, and they projected it onto the cloth for 1/40 billionth of a second. And they were basically able to produce the depth penetration and the coloration of the shroud. That's no mean feat, because, I mean, even some of the skeptics have come up with some reproductions that aren't half bad, but you have to reproduce every single feature before you can even start saying this is how it could have been done. And nobody has done that yet. People generally, if they get the chemistry right, the physics is wrong, and vice versa. But the interesting part about the De Lazzaro experiment is that to extrapolate that to a full cloth, they say there's not even enough energy on Earth right now to be able to accomplish that feat. So
interesting.
It might be a suggestion that at least that radiation was involved, because they did duplicate the coloration and the depth penetration, which is one of the interesting features about the shroud, of course, because it's only on the top several thousandths of an inch of the fiber. It's very superficial. And the image is uniform. Where the image appears darker, it's not because the fibrils are darker, it's because there's more fibrils in that area that whatever caused the image, it's some people say oxidized and degraded cellulose.
Right.
So how does an artist, do that with one fiber? So in other words, one fiber might be dehydrated and the fiber next to it isn't.
Right.
There's no way, to my way of thinking, that a medieval artist could do that in the 15th century. One of my most recent articles was pertaining to I'm losing my train of thought, sorry. But I've done several articles regarding how hard it is for the artist to duplicate the shroud. And you mentioned one of my medical articles as well. And I have several articles about the doctors. And I think it's interesting that quite a few doctors and surgeons, 20th and 21st century doctors, are convinced that it's authentic. They can basically do autopsies on it. And just for an example, I often mention Dr. Buckland, who was on the STIRP team. And by the way, the television program Quincy was kind of based on him. And then there was Dr. Zugabe. And between them, I think they're both deceased, but between them, they probably performed over 50,000 autopsies in their lives, and they were both convinced the shroud's authentic.
Yeah.
And when you see doctor after doctor after doctor saying, this is a real crucified man, and they describe the wounds. I mean, some skeptics make a big deal out of the fact that there's disagreement on exactly where the wrist wound came out or whatever. You get that as a matter of course anyway. I mean, you're never going to get to the point where everybody agrees on every single point, even if they're
well, you don't even get
doctors.
full agreement. You don't even get full agreement that the Earth is flat.
Yeah. Yeah, there are still some flat earthers around today.
That's right. Yeah. So, I liked your point about the Eczema Laser. And if that is a mechanism with radiation to be able to discolor the cloth in the way that it did, that is, it's hard to believe that we're in a level of science that we're only able to, in a small piece, able to replicate with that laser, a little bit of how this shroud might have been discolored. But then you have, the whole thing about, well, how does that radiation combine with the disappearance or the removal of the body, or how did those two things combine? And so we've got tons of science yet that needs to take place, and it may even be that we never figure it out. It may be that, and it may be that that's God's plan, is that we're not supposed to figure it out, and we're as always, we're supposed to certainly have faith that Jesus was walked on the earth, and he died, he was resurrected, and all of the Bible pieces that go with that.
Yeah. And I finally remembered where I lost my train of thought. I couldn't think of the name of the article I wanted to bring up, which is the plethora of disciplines used in the study of the Shroud of Turin. And I'm up to about 97 so far. And the point there is, this is modern. Well, some of the disciplines are old, history and theology and things like that. But a lot of the sciences I list, the disciplines, are relatively recent. And could an artist in the 14th century know enough about all those disciplines to be able to fool 20th and 21st century scientists and researchers? I just really kind of doubt it. I mean, to me, the fact that it hasn't been reproduced, and I don't think it ever will, is one of the strongest arguments about authenticity. And to your point about, the faith element, I think God does want us to have room for faith, so that there's always going to be questions. We'll never probably figure it out 100%, but it's there, and so many people are just spend so much time. John Jackson has surpassed 50 years studying the shroud, and Father Rinaldi, God rest his soul, was spent most of his life with it, and it's just an attraction. You look at that face too. It's like, how could if it's the real thing, there's a beauty and majesty in that face that I find so compelling, and it's so attractive, despite the torture that the man went through.
Right.
And I think a lot of the skeptics come from a worldview question rather than a science question. They realize, whether consciously or not, that if the shroud's authentic, that's going to have implications for their worldview. And so it's just easier to sort of try to debunk it, to assuage their fear of, what if the shroud's real and Jesus was real and heaven is real, and I don't want to think about heaven, I could be in trouble, and people generally don't want to change their worldview. So it's just easier to debunk it.
Yeah.
So,
well, that is a really good point, because then if it is true, and if it's proven to be true and authentic, then those people that don't believe it, you'd have to say, don't believe in the Christian faith, then that means that their worldview is totally wrong, and then all of their whole psyche and everything has to be changed. Yes. And I wonder if that applies to, as well, not only Christians, but then you have Muslims. How would that affect their worldview? Now, they certainly believe Jesus was a prophet, but to be a resurrected prophet, what does that mean then for their religion, which is, one of the closest? And then you have Judaism as well, which is certainly very close with Christianity. And then, you get into like Hindu and, I don't know, Confucian and Buddhism and some of the others, then, what happens to those religions? Do they lose their worldview as well? Very interesting point. Interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, some of the Muslim denominations, if that's the correct word, it's a sects, I guess, believe that, Jesus was substituted on the cross, so that Jesus really didn't die. And some Hindu sects believe that Jesus was taken down alive from the cross and, revived in the tomb. So yeah, I mean, you get all sorts of stories, but if you go back to these doctors that have examined the image and have done 50,000 autopsies, and they say the man was dead, and Stirp concluded that it was the image of a real crucified man. There was real blood on it. Some skeptics say it was, paint or iron oxide or something. And it remained a mystery. It's amazing how Stirp studied it for 5 days around the clock, examined it, firsthand, and all these people who have never even seen the cloth, think they know more than the Stirp team that helped build nuclear bombs and put people on the moon when they weren't working on the shroud. I think if there had been paint on the shroud, I think those guys and a few gals on the team with them, I think they would have been smart enough to find that paint. But their main mission was actually to try to discover what caused the image.
Right.
And so they kind of failed at that because they don't know what it was that caused it.
Well, and that's what I like about science. Well, like and dislike is that, in most cases, science can never prove something to be true. They can only prove that a lot of things are false about it. Mm-hmm. And so in the Stirp case, they weren't able to prove that this image was made in whatever fashion, but they were able to disprove that it was not paint, it was not a dye, it was not all of these other things. And so then it kind of narrows then the options that are kind of left that in terms of how that image could be made. And that's what I like about science. And I also like the kind of the adversarial nature of science. It's kind of like, well, you get an article that says, we believe this, and then another scientist says, well, I think you made a mistake in that, and here's why, but then here's what comes out of that. And you kind of have this, this ladder of increasing knowledge and increasing value that can really lead to, good knowledge as it relates to the authenticity of the shroud.
Mm. Yeah, and to that point, another recent article I did, in fact, it is my most recent article, has to do with articles in journals. I had written an article about all the peer-reviewed articles about the shroud, and I explained this in my new article. An archaeologist who is involved in shroud research wrote to me, and he said, basically that peer review doesn't have the same meaning that it did in the before the internet age. When Stirp did their work, they published their findings in about 24 peer-reviewed journals. Nowadays, the whole peer review question is really muddied by vanity publishing and pay to these journals that say they're peer reviewed, but all you have to do is pay them and they'll print your thing, and they might not even really have anybody look at it too much, but it's still termed peer review. So it's kind of unfortunate that that has been muddied a bit, but I guess it's the internet's a double-edged sword. It helps spread knowledge about the shroud faster, but you have to learn to separate the wheat from the chaff. But and a lot of the old journals like Applied Optics and ones like that, Thermochemica Acta, articles that were around before the internet age, those are really the best journals to find the most accurate information. And one of my articles is all the articles, shroud-related articles that the Stirp team did. So that it would include their 24 papers that they did up until about 1984. And then some of the guys stayed active and wrote some further articles. So I expanded it. But Barry Schwartz has also has every single one of those 24 original STIRP articles, a hot link on his site as well. And I have it in my article. And I would recommend that for anybody that really wants to look at the background of the science on the shroud. They really need to start with those, because those are the guys that studied it directly. And most of the shroud research to this day is kind of based on their work. It's not easy sledding, but people really need to go there.
Yeah. Well, you're right about kind of the democratization of research, and the internet certainly has value in terms of making the knowledge widely available. But to your point, it has also, I don't know if I'd call it corrupted, but certainly reduced many of the peer-reviewed papers of the quality that some of the other ones might have been, like in some of the publications you were talking about. And but on the other hand, one of the things, though, I think that really comes out of the democratization is you do get a lot of interesting ideas and new thinking of people that they're not trained in science necessarily, and they're not necessarily trained in, but they end up spending a lot of brain power and thinking about one little thing, and all of a sudden an interesting idea might come up, or they may find maybe they go off and they go to the library in Besançon and they find a couple of articles there that date back to some of the activities that were taking place then, and that, I think that has real value. And I still think there's a lot of value yet in and hopefully it hasn't been destroyed, but potentially even in Antioch and Syria. There might be some writings that have been hidden away or whatever. There might be some writings in Persia that have to do with Edessa and stuff like that. So I still think there's a lot of stuff to be discovered about the shroud. Yeah,
and I saw something in the literature recently that I probably had seen at some point, but didn't strike me. But I saw it again. The fact that during the Fourth Crusade, when the shroud was apparently stolen in 1204, the Crusaders also destroyed the library at Constantinople. And you can't help but wonder if there was, the shroud had probably been in Constantinople since 944. So there's 300 years, or almost 300 years, where there might have been documents in that library that could have told us a lot about the shroud, and the documents got destroyed. The hardcore historians always want primary documents, and you can understand that. That's their discipline. That's how they do history. But I often make the point that, history really isn't enough, because let's face it, historical documents could be lost, manipulated, or never written down in the first place. So you have to be careful about overvaluing the need of primary historical documents. In a court of law, they allow circumstantial evidence because you don't always have all the direct evidence that you want, and there's just so many avenues to study the shroud. And again, if the people go to that article about the various disciplines, it's mind-blowing how many different disciplines have been used to look at the shroud. And as science and technology gets more advanced, there'll probably be more new techniques used, including, and there's a good chance, I think, that as far as the dating of the shroud goes, Giulio Fanti has come up with about 4 different new dating methods, all of which in his eyes kind of suggest that the shroud is 1st century. Now, one has to say that those methods are all pretty new and not time tested really yet, to the degree where you could say, oh yeah, we can trust these. But who knows, 25, 50 years down the road, they may be commonplace. And if the shroud is allowed to have more testing, they'll probably use the new methods rather than the C14, especially given there were so many problems with the old C14. I can't see them doing another one, but we have to get a pope first that will allow some testing. And who knows when that will be.
Well, I guess too, the problem with the C14 is that it's destructive, and right. As opposed to something that might be able to be either less destructive or it only destroys, a tiny, tiny little bit. And because it's, you think about the shroud, it, being potentially being 2,000 years old, to actually cut a little, 1-inch square and destroying it. It's, and then worse than that, if you wanted to take it right from where the image is, you would destroy the image.
Right.
And so it's definitely a trade-off between, how it's done. And in this picture behind my shoulder here is one of the exhibitions of the shroud. And you can see how the carbon-14 dating could have been not manipulated, but certainly, corrupted by all of the handling that took place when they were holding on to the shroud in the corners and stuff like that. But so, if the science like Giulio Fanti is talking about can start to bring, different methods together that withstand the test of time, then that would be fantastic. And I don't know, you're right. I mean, hopefully there will be a pope that will allow some additional testing here at some point.
Sure. To that point about the exhibitions, in centuries past, they exhibited the shroud much more often than they do now. And I think there were at least 275 exhibitions. Another one of my articles recounts the specific places and years that those took place. But if you're talking about 275 exhibitions and the bishops holding it on that corner each time, at the very least, it indicates that those corners were going to need some repair. Yeah. And I think there's a good chance, based on Ray Rogers' work and some other people that he gave his samples to, that confirmed it, including a group of 9 at Los Alamos National Laboratories. They suggested that they didn't suggest that they did find gum, dye, cotton, and even a splice thread of linen and cotton. Now the shroud is linen all over, except for that corner, and there's cotton there. And people say, well, why would there be cotton? Well, cotton takes dye much better than the linen does. So, I asked the question, because people contest the idea that there was a repair there. And it's like, okay, well, if there wasn't a repair there, explain to me why you have all the ingredients there that you would need for a repair. You just, you can't, in science, you just can't say, I like my theory and I don't like yours, so I'm going to ignore yours. You have to explain data. And I'm kind of excited. I'm planning on updating a paper I gave in Canada in 2019 on the reweave. And I felt I was thrilled because they gave me I think it was about an hour and a half to deliver that paper. So the organizer wanted me to give some background on how my late wife and I came to that. So I was able to put in a lot of detail that I normally couldn't deal with. But in a scientific conference, most conferences, you don't have the luxury of giving that much background. But I am updating it, and I might be invited to a conference in Mexico later this year. So I would probably present it there, and I think it's possibly planned for, or they're thinking about it, I should say, for Mexico City in the fall of 2022. If I don't give it there, I'm hoping that I can give it sometime in 2023. But I think if people look at the evidence, and I've got my 2019 paper is on my academia page, so they can see what's there now. I think the evidence is very strong that there's a repair there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and plus, if you think about, the Jewish burial custom and just cloth in general, that it has to be pure. So the original cloth would had to have been 100% linen. And then how could you then have cotton in the corner without it having had been repaired? Right. So it certainly, kind of suggests that there was repair there, and then that would be a good reason why the carbon dating that was run. The carbon dating may have actually been done absolutely correctly. It was the sample, either uncleaned or improperly cleaned or repaired, that then distorted the true results.
Yeah.
And and then only taking it from one location, to your point, instead of taking it in different locations to where there might be pure linen, or there might be no repairs and stuff like that.
Well, this is a good place for me to make a important point about that C14 and the lab's reputation and whatnot. You're absolutely right. They actually may have gotten close to the date of the sample that they were given. However, there was so many screw ups, as documented in my 800-page book, that based on that, I wouldn't trust any date they got. And this is easy to say because it didn't come out first century, but if they had come out with first century, just based on the 800 pages of screw ups that they did, I wouldn't be too confident that they got the first century date right. Now that here we're talking psychology and stuff, and I actually I've got a separate article on my academia page about psychological factors that affect our belief about the shroud. And I think there's like 12 or 13 different things, like cognitive dissonance and different things. And we're all, let's face it, nobody is totally non-biased.
Right.
We all come to the shroud and our belief about anything with preconceptions, our culture, our environment, all those affect how we believe something. But the best you can do is try to minimize biases as best one can. And if you look at the shroud and you see hundreds and hundreds of people over hundreds and hundreds of years believing it's authentic, despite the fact that they might agree on points A, B, or C, I think that's impressive. I think we accept a lot of things as fact in the world that have tons less evidence than what we have on the shroud. But because the shroud has that religious aspect to it, we almost make special rules for it. That it just like the C14. If C14 doesn't agree with other forms of dating on another object, they just throw the C14 date out, even if they don't know what caused it. But in the case of the shroud, skeptics especially want to keep that one piece of data and throw out the hundreds and hundreds of other pieces of data. That's not real science to do it that way. And again, that points back, I think, to what I mentioned about the worldview, that they're happy to have a fake shroud over an authentic shroud. And so we'll bend the rules a little bit, and we'll keep the carbon 14 and throw out all the other evidence that points to authenticity.
So what you're saying is that they're biased.
I would say that those people have not minimized their biases quite as well as they should have at this point. But people are going to, on the other hand, people are going to say I'm biased. But I do have to say, when I read my first book on the shroud in 1977, I was totally agnostic about, agnostic religiously, and I was agnostic about the authenticity of the shroud. I read the book with a completely open mind, and based on the evidence that I read in that book in 1977, which of course is before all the data that Stirp produced, I thought the evidence back then was strong enough to think that the shroud was probably authentic. And then now add 45 years of additional research, and there's absolutely nothing that has changed my mind about it being authentic. And I just believe, based on the evidence, scientific evidence, and I have to say, there's other aspects. There's the religious aspect. I've actually had what I would determine to be religious experiences related to the shroud, and that's part of my basis for believing it's real. And of course, that's kind of the opposite end in a way. I don't think science and religion are totally mutually exclusive, but let's face it, in science, you look for proof, and in religious experiences and stuff, normally, unless it's a phenomena that can be observed by other people, it's often a internal or personal experience, and that's the sort of experiences that I had, that somebody looking at me might not see a phenomenon, but right. I've had an experience that to me is proof, but I can't prove it to them.
Right. No, and I think a lot of people have had exactly that, and how can you potentially prove it in a scientific way? And and I think you're right too, since 77 and 78 certainly with Stirp, and that explosion of scientific research that's now gone on about the shroud is, and like I said before we got started, is that there definitely seems like there's an acceleration of people getting interested again in the shroud, and I've got to break off here in a little bit, but the the radiocarbon dating definitely tripped up a lot of shroudists, and it slowed a lot of the research down. But I think now, over the last, as I see all the papers that you're doing and everything else, it's it's picking right back up again, and it seems to be going on in a big way. And I run into new people that are doing new things with it, and they're investing time and money and effort and their brain powers into the shroud and trying to learn more about it.
Yeah, I just came across a new article last night in my that I put in my most recent posting of what you're calling my newsletter. It's periodical alerts about the latest shroud news, articles, videos, podcasts. And somebody contacted me and said that they had written an article about the C14 testing. And boy, he gave me the site, and I was really impressed. I mean, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to reading that. And he goes in quite a bit of detail about my own reweave theory, and also some of the radiation theories that posit that the radiation might have been the thing that threw off the C14 dating. So yeah, if anybody interested in doing shroud research, there's plenty of room, and plenty of topics and plenty of disciplines to attack it by, and we'd love to see more people come on in and try their expertise at it, and add to the knowledge base, because
join the party.
Join the party.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and with that, actually, one of the things I want to do is and I'll just put a plug in for a couple of other ones, and would love to get you back, is there's clearly different questions, that you can really spend almost an hour talking about, and hours. There's the Besançon and the Troyes, and was there a shroud there? Was it a fake? Was it the real one? There's a whole topic on that. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have the historian of the Royal Mint, and we're going to talk about Byzantine coins and all the coinage that was done and made based on the shroud, and how that could, have what he learned, and then what we can maybe, use to add to the knowledge base on just the coinage in over time on that. So definitely looking forward to that. And I think, as time progresses, there'll be a whole lot of different topics that you can really get pretty deeply in, and definitely look at both sides. I think, even on the paper that you have on the base on Sun shroud, there's clearly two sides there. And I think that's incredibly valuable to see both sides. And then hopefully that'll lead to even further research to, maybe, either enhance one side and reduce one side or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But at some point, just to get closer and closer and closer to that truth is where I think we're all trying to head to.
Yeah, I think it's important I'm not afraid to present the skeptic's arguments, because I really feel like there is positive research that can explain or counter any argument that the skeptics come up with. So I think a lot of the skeptics cherry pick what they want to say in terms of points that they think disprove the shroud, but they ignore many that point toward authenticity. So I think it is important to try to give a balanced view if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, let's close it out here. And again, thank you, Joe. It's always so good to talk with you. And I learn something every day. And I am so impressed with how much you've been writing and adding to the knowledge base on the shroud. And you've definitely, when I get your newsletter and when I get look at your papers, I learn more every time. So definitely really appreciate that. And then so for those of you listening, Joe's got a wealth of information, and he puts out a newsletter, and that newsletter can be found at jmarino240@aol.com, jmarino240@aol.com. And there's always good stuff on there to sink your teeth into. Other than that, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series on the backstory of the Shroud of Turin. Please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more episodes. And if you like this one, please rate it with 5 stars. Joe, thank you so much.
Thank you, Guy. And I really appreciate all these videos you're doing, because I've learned a lot from the various guests you've had.
Thank you. I appreciate that.